Welcome back to the deep dive. So we are jumping right into a really fascinating stack of source material today. It all points to this massive, almost existential shift in how businesses need to operate. And if you're out there trying to manage this wave of AI integration, it turns out the core problem might not be the tech at all. It's the very architecture of your organization.
That really is the crux of it. I mean, for over a century, management theory, people like Taylor and Fayol, it was all optimized for what we can basically call linear geometry.
A straight line, the shortest distance between 2 points.
Exactly. A predictable Euclidean world where A always leads to B. Organizations were built on these, vertical layers, sequential processes, very neat and tidy hierarchies.
The classic pyramid.
The classic pyramid. But today, every organization is a complex adaptive system, and outcomes, they don't emerge from these neat linear chains anymore. They come from these intricate, dynamic webs of relationships.
So the old blueprint, that linear architecture, it's just brittle. It's blind to what's really happening.
It is. It's fundamentally breaking down.
Okay, so if the old pyramid is obsolete, what's the new blueprint? What's the mission for us here in this deep dive?
The mission is to introduce and really explore this idea of graph thinking. This is the emergent leadership skill that we think determines everything: strategic resilience, successful AI integration.
Graph thinking.
It's the ability to stop seeing your organization as a static flowchart and start seeing it for what it is: an interconnected network, a dynamic collection of nodes and edges.
And we're going to show why this isn't just some, technical thing for data scientists.
Right. It's the core strategic competence for, frankly, long-term survival.
Yeah. All right, let's get into the foundations then.
Yeah.
When you say graph thinking, what are the basic components? What are we talking about?
The components are actually pretty simple. At the highest level, the organization is a network. And every individual, every team, every computer system, every external partner, those are all nodes.
Nodes. Got it.
And the relationships between them, the dependencies, the information flows, the trust, the formal contracts, those are the edges.
So traditional management has been focused almost entirely on the nodes, right? On the individual parts.
90% of the time, yes. Analyzing the nodes in isolation. Graph thinking flips that. It recognizes that the real outcomes, the value, it's all determined by the architecture of the edges.
So the formal org chart, it's a very optimistic but often wildly inaccurate map of reality.
It is. And that gap, the space between the formal structure and the functional reality, that's what graph thinking helps you see and bridge.
How does a leader do that? What are the capabilities?
Well, the sources point to 4 interconnected capabilities. The first one is structural perception, just seeing past the org chart to the actual, often informal relationship architectures.
Seeing how work actually gets done.
Exactly. Who actually talks to whom, not just who reports to whom.
That makes sense.
Then the second is dependency mapping. This is about tracing how a decision, or even a small failure, can ripple through the entire network.
So if I cut a budget over here in Department A,
right. You can start to model the potential failure cascades that could completely blindside Department C 6 months from now.
failure cascades. I mean, that sounds critical. If you can't map the dependencies, you can't possibly manage the risk.
You can't. And the third is position analysis. This is recognizing that value often comes not from individual output, but from someone's location in the network.
Like controlling a bottleneck.
Precisely. You might have someone with no big title, but because they bridge 2 critical silos, say finance and R&D, they become disproportionately valuable. They're a hub.
I think we all know those people. The ones who just quietly make everything work because they know who to call.
We do. And finally, there's ecosystem architecture. This is the big picture view, understanding that your company's boundaries are, well, they're porous. Your performance depends critically on the quality of relationships with your suppliers, partners, even customers.
So you're not just managing the hierarchy inside, you're actively designing the entire network.
You have to.
Okay, let's talk about the proof. The sources highlight a really clear pattern here. The companies that are dominating AI adoption today, it's not a coincidence. They were structured around graphs from day one.
It's a massive head start.
Yeah.
They made the graph the absolute center of their business model. I mean, look at Amazon.
Right.
They didn't just build a warehouse. They built a foundational purchase graph that maps everything: customer views, purchase history, browsing patterns. That graph is the bedrock for their recommendation engines, their demand forecasting, basically every AI tool they've rolled out since.
So it's the difference between just having a list of transactions and seeing a whole web of desire and fulfillment.
That's a great way to put it. Or think about Netflix. They built this huge content graph linking millions of subscribers' preferences, what they watch, what they skip, all the content attributes.
And that's what powers the personalization.
It powers personalization, which is key for retention, but even more importantly, it guides their huge content investments. They're not just guessing, they're investing based on deep network insights.
And, of course, the classic case has to be Meta.
Absolutely. Meta built its entire company on the social graph, the relationship structures, the interactions. That architecture created those unstoppable network effects, and it gave them the perfect training data for their AI.
You've got Google, which basically had to map the whole internet.
Exactly. Google uses the knowledge graph and the search graph to map semantic relationships, not just words, but concepts. And that let them shift from simple keyword matching, a very linear process, to genuine semantic understanding.
Which is the foundation for all the generative AI we're seeing now.
It's the prerequisite. And here's the key takeaway. These companies succeed because their AI agents operate on a graph. But traditional companies, they try to bolt these amazing AI tools onto their old linear structures.
They're giving the AI a task, but no map.
Exactly. It's a fundamental architectural mismatch, and it just guarantees friction and failure.
Which brings us to the high cost of this network blindness. When leaders try to manage these complex networks with tools designed for simple hierarchies, things go wrong.
Systematically wrong. The sources cite that 50 to 70% of major change initiatives fail. And why? Because the leaders, the linear managers, they just couldn't trace the dependency paths. They had no idea what the blast radius of their decisions would be.
Can you give us a really tangible example of how that plays out?
Let's talk about supply chains. In the early 2000s, manufacturers were obsessed with efficiency, so they consolidated suppliers.
Right. Cut costs.
A straight line cost reduction. But what they didn't see was that they were creating these very sparse networks, and that dramatically increased the betweenness centrality of the suppliers who were left.
Okay, hold on. Between beingness centrality, that's a classic graph theory term, right? Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, it just means that a single supplier became the sole bridge, the one and only choke point between massive parts of the global system.
So it's super efficient, but also incredibly fragile.
Critically exposed. So when the 2011 Japan earthquake hit, it wasn't just the physical damage that stopped production, it was the failure of a handful of these high-betweenness suppliers. The companies that had denser, maybe less efficient, but more resilient networks, they recovered so much faster.
Because they had other paths, other options.
They had redundancy built into their structure, linear thinking chose efficiency, graph thinking demands resilience.
That's a powerful lesson. What about something like innovation? How does the network structure affect where new ideas come from?
The research on this is really clear. Invention rates correlate very strongly with what are called network structural holes.
Structural holes.
It's just the gaps between disconnected clusters of knowledge in a company. So the person or the team that bridges that gap, connects the R&D nerds with the manufacturing floor guys, that's where novel ideas spark.
So what happens when a company reorganizes and doesn't see that?
They inadvertently eliminate these high-betweenness gap-bridging roles, and they see an innovation collapse 12 to 18 months later. That's a terrifying lag time. You make a budget cut that seems totally unrelated, and 2 years later, your company stops innovating, and you can't figure out why.
And the linear manager will never connect the two events. Never. And we haven't even touched on the human cost of this.
The burnout.
The burnout, this bridge note phenomenon. These high-betweenness employees, the technical architect or the physician liaison in a hospital, they are translating across silos all day. It's a massive cognitive load.
And their value isn't something that shows up on a standard performance review, right?
Not at all. Their value is their position and the energy it takes to maintain it. So they are a huge risk of burnout, and when they leave, it's a catastrophe.
So if I'm a leader listening to this, how do I even find that person? And what's the actual cost if they walk out the door?
You find them by watching who everyone runs to when the official process breaks down. And if they walk out, decision-making paths that took one step now take 5. Critical work slows to a crawl, and you can't explain it with your normal metrics.
It's an invisible structural failure. It is. Just like in healthcare, where clinical outcomes are strongly correlated with the network density of the care team. Low density means fragmented care, bad handoffs, and preventable errors. The system blames an individual when the real problem is the structure.
Okay, so if the problem is network blindness, the solution has to be systematic network intervention. This isn't just about analysis, it's about actively changing the network.
Exactly. You have to make the implicit networks explicit. And the foundational tool for that is organizational network analysis, or ONA.
ONA.
ONA uses data, often just passive communication data, to map out the functional reality. It shows you the informal networks that are doing the real work, which almost always looks completely different from the org chart.
And the sources had some great examples of this in action.
They did. Take Microsoft. They used ONA and found these specific mid-level engineers who were getting, just average performance reviews.
But they were the hidden connectors.
They were the critical information bridges between entire product divisions. So Microsoft, very smartly, didn't just promote them into management. They created policies to protect and support those network positions, formalizing their bridging role.
That is smart. You reward the network value without breaking what makes them valuable.
Precisely. Or Kaiser Permanente. They used ONA and found that nurses were in these incredibly high betweenness positions, connecting doctors, specialists, patients, everyone.
A huge cognitive load.
Massive.
Yeah.
And a huge reason for turnover. So Kaiser redesigned the care team structure specifically to support the nurses' bridging role, not just their clinical tasks. They fixed a critical failure point in the network.
So beyond mapping the structure, you have to look at edge quality. It's not just who is connected, but how.
Right. Is it a good connection or an adversarial one? This is where you get into design. You have to distinguish between strong ties, high trust, rich information, and weak ties, which are crucial for bringing in new ideas.
How do you fix a bad edge?
Cisco had a great example. They had this historically adversarial edge between product engineering and customer success, always blaming each other.
I've seen that movie before.
We all have. Their solution was to create shared customer health metrics. By aligning their incentives right at that relationship point, they transformed a weak adversarial edge into a strong collaborative one. It changed everything.
So aligning the metrics is actually a form of network design.
It is. Another key intervention is path length reduction. So many organizations just suffer from having too many steps for information to travel. It slows everything down.
Amazon's two-pizza team rule is the classic example here.
It's the textbook example. By keeping teams small enough to be fed by 2 pizzas, they slashed the path length from customer feedback to product improvement. They went from, say, 7 steps down to 1 or 2.
Radical acceleration.
And finally, on betweenness management, protecting those critical bridge nodes. IBM created the Distinguished Engineer Career Track specifically to retain those high betweenness technical experts without forcing them into management. They formalized and rewarded the network value.
Okay, so let's get to the cutting edge. Architecting the human-AI collaborative network. Because as AI agents become more like active colleagues, the design of those relationships feels like the next frontier.
It is the new frontier, and success is going to depend less on the algorithm's raw intelligence and more on the network design that integrates it.
So what does that network require?
Number 1 is building explicit knowledge graphs. You see, humans navigate companies using tacit knowledge, who knows what, who to trust, how things really work.
Yeah.
AI needs that context encoded explicitly. It needs the map.
So you can't just plug an AI in. You have to first teach it the real map of the organization,
Yeah.
not just the formal org chart.
Precisely. And second, you have to design for complementary relationships. The edges, the connections between humans and AI, they have to assign tasks based on comparative advantage.
So humans for context and judgment, AI for scale and pattern recognition.
Exactly. It's about augmentation, not just automation. And crucially, this can't be a one-way street.
The relationship has to support mutual learning.
Absolutely. The architecture needs feedback loops. The human improves the AI's performance, yes, but the AI also develops the human's understanding by spotting patterns they would have missed.
The sources mention Stitch Fix as a really great example of this in practice.
Stitch Fix is a perfect illustration. They use AI to do what humans can't, sift through a massive inventory to find possibilities. But the human stylist provides the final selection, the emotional intelligence, the judgment that builds the client relationship.
The network architecture defines that perfect handoff between the AI scale and the human's touch.
It's a beautifully designed collaborative network.
This whole deep dive, it really makes it clear that graph thinking isn't a nice to have. It's the decisive competency now. The failures of network blindness, they're not just random mistakes, they're systematic structural flaws.
And you can look back at business history for a final, really potent warning here. Think about Nokia's decline.
Right. They were making great phones.
They were focused on product innovation, manufacturing efficiency, all the linear stuff. But while they were doing that, Apple and Google were building superior ecosystem graphs, their developer networks, their content
The
relationships.
structure they failed to see was the one that ultimately doomed them.
Exactly. Nokia discovered its strategic network deficit way too late, after the network effects had already locked them out.
That is a fascinating and frankly a terrifying thought. What you don't map can be infinitely more dangerous than what you can see.
And it raises the core question for every organization listening right now. In this age of intelligence, a straight line might look like short-term efficiency, but it's the graph that defines long-term viability.
So the central choice for every leader is whether you're going to make that shift from linear to network thinking now while you still have options.
Or if you're going to be forced to discover your network realities only through the systematic failures that your linear thinking could never, ever explain.
That is the architectural challenge facing you. We hope this deep dive into graph thinking has given you the blueprint you need to look at your organization and your future in a completely new way. Thank you for tuning in.